You know, like I would see a lot of people. I would see a lot of people like in medicine, for instance, with diabetes or high blood pressure. These different chronic conditions that, when we really get to the core, really behavioral, and a lot of the difficulty in managing them is like getting people to somehow change their behavior. And then when I got to psychiatry, it seemed really clear that the things I was most deeply interested in were things that psychiatrists could actually spend a lot of time thinking about. Whereas in other specialties, I feel like a lot of those things about someone's sort of personal life, their social history, their developmental background, were kind of seen as like secondary to like, we have to like, you know, fix this knee, or we need to get their blood pressure down, you know? And so psychiatry for me became like a really powerful tool to intersect these ideas of healing, ideas of spirituality, ideas of music, and like how all these things can be integrated to help people struggle and deal with, I think, what can be like a very difficult life with a lot of different diverse experiences. So that's kind of what really led me to psychiatry. And so far, I would say that that intuition was definitely correct. I love this field and sort of really its potential. I don't think it's really reached potential, but I think its capacity really to transform the way that we intersect with each other and the way that society functions is really, really great. What about you? Like, how did you get into psychiatry?
Oh, well, my story is not as sophisticated as yours. So whilst in 300 level in Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, I discovered that I was squeamish. Did not like body fluids at all, blood, saliva, and any other kinds of body fluids. And this sort of like set me up for some kind of existential crisis where you've committed X number of years into a field and you find out that maybe this this field isn't for you. So I mean, as I trudged along in medical school, I found a place where doctors sat to do their ward rounds, uh, and everything. I mean, there was an aversion, or there was. I mean, you don't think about it as an aversion, but there was a tendency not to want to touch patients or explore their lymph or blood body fluids and all that stuff. So that was for me where like, okay, well, this looks like home. We're sitting down, we're having conversations with patients, and we're taking them seriously. And I guess that's really where, for me, the love of psychiatry began, where I found out that this was a field. I mean, and it's still perhaps the only field where the patient is co-opted into their own care. And there's pretty much not much that you can do for a patient if the patient's buy-in is not part of it. In fact, you do not only need the patient's buy-in, you need their family's buy-in. Sometimes you need their spouse's buy-in. You need so much buy-in from everyone. So it's a multidisciplinary field in itself. And also there's the society's buy-in also is there, because you cannot talk or think about psychiatry without the society. I mean, who labels one with mental illness? Who assigns these labels? And how do we determine who is mentally ill? The society is part of that as well. And just like you've said, there are no boundaries for psychiatry really, because I mean, it's a science in itself, and as much as also an art, and it's also something in the humanities, and then you have philosophy in it, and then there's religion, and there is even capitalism gets its own share as well. I mean, racism, um, even anti-psychiatrists are involved in psychiatry. So it's just wonderful in the way it blends a lot of things together. And I mean, I made that decision to become a psychiatrist about 7 years ago, and I have no regrets. I have no regrets at all, and I'm happy to be in this space to share with people who are in that phase of their lives where they have to make decisions about their career goals. And I mean, they're already coming towards this side already. And I mean, of course, we have to still talk about a few other things that, it's involved in psychiatry. And maybe a good place to start again, or to bring you back into the conversation, would be to ask about stigma. I mean, there's a lot of courtesy stigma in psychiatry, stigma to patients, stigma to even we psychiatrists ourselves. I mean, back in Nigeria, you would hear them saying, I mean, especially if you're a psychiatrist working in a teaching hospital, you hear the other doctors in different departments say, oh, well, we don't even know who's more sane, these guys or their patients. You know, and even, I mean, even the, you know, even, I mean, it's a major part of it as well. You know, the fact that there is some level of court stigma that is also extended to us as psychiatrists, and I don't know how you cope with that. I mean, is it a thing in the US as well? Um, like it is in, say, Nigeria, and I mean to an extent in the UK as well. Um, and how do you manage it?
Yeah, I think there is definitely stigma around, on one hand, around mental health in general, in this, and particularly in communities of the diaspora of African descent. People are very like afraid to talk about their internal experiences, especially when they're sort of more on the extremes of human experience. I think that also happens in psychiatry. I will say that psychiatry now is getting a lot more respect, because not only the evolution of neuroscience that helps, I think, to facilitate kind of some of our understanding, but it really is sort of, you know, the last sort of frontier of medicine right now. Like when you think about what we do and don't know about the human being, psychiatry really deals with a lot of the unknowns. And in that way, I think it's becoming more and more um, respected in that way. Yeah, I will, let me blur my background. Okay.
Solid. Yeah, you still have the floor.
Okay, yeah. So I think there is that that stigma there, but um, you know, I think part of how I deal with it is like understanding that in a sense, right, a lot of society is operating from a very delusional framework, right?
Right.
And I think psychiatry gives us an opportunity to really start getting to the core of human experience and the core of like how do we really help people to achieve wellness. I think keeping that perspective when I'm speaking with patients and even speaking with other clinicians, and bringing that perspective that really centers the person's experience, and like you said, almost forces them to be co-opted into this process of you know, wellness, and like how do they actually have the tools to navigate their experiences. And so for me, like I deal with that by really just focusing on the patients. And it's like I know I went into this field because I understand its potential, and kind of where it can lead. And so I think I'm fortunate also to practice in an institution that actually values psychiatry, one from an economical standpoint, because they have like a lot of trials and studies and sort of development of agents. But
Right.
I think the ways in which we're able to sort of bail out our colleagues when they have situations that they can't handle, I think it is respected. I think it's becoming more and more respected as really more and more really talented people go into this field. Like imagine psychiatry now compared to 10 years ago, it's like very different. And the bar continues to rise higher and higher, I think, as more medical students are seeing sort of that this is a really exciting frontier to operate in.
I totally agree with you, especially in the sense that psychiatry itself is emerging, and we're getting more attention. I mean, it's the attention now is a bit more, will I say, cooperative, in the sense that the society itself is beginning to see that the conversation around mental illness and mental health we cannot afford for it to be a taboo conversation, because the conversation that we need to have anyway, if we do decide not to have it in safe spaces in hospitals, we would have to have them somewhere else, maybe in the shrines or in the church. And we just need to have these conversations, because I mean it's a major part of the holistic experience of wellness and health in itself. The fact that we're talking about it is perhaps a first step towards destigmatizing, and once that has begun, I mean, and once we're able to move the focus back to the patients themselves and towards their well-being, I mean, I guess it's a good way to tackle stigma. My next question really will be taken from the questions that we sent. I mean, a lot of people on this call are interested in trying to get a sense of the process or the procedure as to how to become a psychiatrist in the US. And I don't know if you just want to share, your own experience. I mean, and how, very basic steps as to how you did what you did and to get to where you are now.
Yeah, so I think, the common things, undergrad, med school, being, especially, if you're coming from international training, taking the USMLE step exams. And then, the interview process for the different residencies. I didn't really have any geographic locations, but I had a very clear sense of like what I wanted my training process to look like and what kind of training I felt would be valuable and not valuable. And so you will see that there are different kinds of programs that have sort of different philosophical leanings. So some programs might be much more pharmacologically driven, and they don't focus as much on psychotherapy, whereas some programs focus much more on therapy and aren't as pharmacologically or neuroscientifically based. And I knew that I wanted to have like a very good mix of both in a program that had strengths in both. I'll also say that I think there are, like, we have to think about psychiatry as a field as in some ways an extension of white supremacy. And what I mean by that is that when psychiatry was actually formed, right, in earnest in Europe, if you look at the guys who were forming it, right, and some of their ideas, you will see that there is an underlying sort of white supremacy that is undergirded sort of how the field becomes a field. And when it came to the US, how we determined who had what conditions and how they should be treated, there's a huge sort of racial component to that, right? So understanding all of that, I wanted to be in a place that understood the tradition of the field, but wasn't so married to it that they felt like that's the way that we should continue to go, and that had some room to be able to explore and come up with new ways of thinking about how do we help people navigate their experiences and achieve wellness. And so for me, looking at all those things, when I was on the interview trail, it was really about like asking very specific questions to get a sense of like how people felt about all these things. So once you go through the application process, then you do the match. And it's it's an algorithm that basically once you create a tier of like, this is the place I'd like to go first, second, third, it uses that and the matches from all the other applicants into the field and into those places to basically put you ranked to where you'd like to match. And so I was fortunate to match at the place that I really wanted to go, my top choice, which was Yale, for all of the reasons that I just said. And then once you're in residency, it's a 4-year program. If you want to do child, after 3 years, you can fast track into child, or you can do all 4 years and then do some sort of fellowship in child or intervention or all these other various things that you can do. So that's basically the general process: undergrad, med school, or if you're in like the UK system, once you go through that whole kind of med certification process, then taking the board exams, applying to residencies, matching, ranking, matching, and then starting residency.
Right. Thanks so much for that. And for also saying something that I think it's very important aspect of psychiatry, especially as people of color, Black people and people of color, we cannot remove race from the conception of psychiatry itself. I mean, and I guess, I don't know if any of the people on the call have read Fanon, Frantz Fanon. And I mean, that's the point of what Fanon was talking about. Even psychiatry has to be decolonized in some sense of a way, because I mean, like most things that were led by the we say the intellectuals of that generation, I mean the Enlightenment age, a lot of this was I mean, they looked upon Black people a certain kind of way to imagine that we are inferior, as it were, and that has really, I mean, set us back in many ways. I mean, set not just us as Black people, but even the entire humanity itself, because that means that the experiences and the cultural innovations of Black people has been done away with. So much so that we as Black people ourselves there are aspects of our own culture that we have denigrated and we have exempted ourselves from. I mean, so yeah, that's, I thank you very much for bringing that in. Well, from my own experience, I mean, I trained in Nigeria, Obafemi University, Ife, to be in I did my medical degree there, even though when I was supposed to be studying, I was doing other things like writing books and just being generally troublesome, because I was also in being an activist and all. And I haven't finished that. In Nigeria, the easiest way to get into a residency program is to pass the residency exams. I'm aware that there are several training programs in Nigeria. Different hospitals have different training programs. I was opportune to have joined the training program at Yaba Neuropsychiatric Hospital, which is really the biggest psychiatric hospital in Nigeria. We had a bed space of about 536 beds. And then I did most of my training there until I now came to the UK to join the Royal College of Psychiatrists medical training initiative. And just to speak to, pathways for people who are interested, for you to get into the MTI scheme, you must have done at least 3 years of training in psychiatry before you can be taken up. Essentially, what MTI scheme does is allows for a small amount of psychiatrists from international medical graduates who are not from the UK to come into the UK and experience the NHS and get a sense of what the experience of practicing psychiatry in the NHS is. Ultimately, this means that it would be in roles held by the core trainees in their third year. So, the psychiatry training in the UK is mostly in two parts. So there's the core training and then there's higher training. So the core training takes about 3 years, and from getting registered as a doctor, you can apply through Oriel, which is, I think, one of the ways in which to apply if you are just you're entering from maybe Nigeria, for instance. If having done your housemanship, you can get write PLAB, which is the board exams, and then get registered in GMC. And once you do that, you can now go for FY2. And of course, if you're interested in psychiatry, it might be good for you to try and do some FY2 training in psychiatry. And then from there, you apply into the core trainee. And at the end of the core trainee, what you're expected to do is to complete the membership exams, which is a three-tier exam. So there's the paper A, which is essentially psychiatry, basic sciences in psychiatry. Paper B, which is core psychiatry itself, and then the CASC exam, which is a clinical examination for you to, once you pass all these exams, it becomes easier for you to decide what you want to do next. A lot of people will take gap years, maybe do a PhD or do a master's, and then can now continue with the higher training, which could be as long as it could be. Some people do dual training in maybe general adult and old age, or general adult and psychotherapy. It's really up to you as a person what options you hope to take. But I guess this answers the questions around the pathways on how to navigate from being a psychiatrist. So if you're in training in Nigeria, for instance, or you want to do some training in Nigeria, you can always come in through the MTI scheme. And if you do not get into the MTI scheme, there are other schemes that are available in the UK as well that affords a small cohort of psychiatrists who are at a certain level of their training to come back into the training. So I guess that's a good way to get that question out of the way.
One of the things I'm thinking about, Dami, as you talk about this transition is like, what have you experienced in terms of the cultural approach to mental illness that was different, in Nigeria versus once you got to the NHS? Are there any, any cultural things that stand out? Any ways of
Oh,
practicing that can you
definitely,
talk to that? Yeah.
definitely. I mean, and thanks for asking that question. So I've always been one person to think a lot about psychiatry as two things. The two things that one needs to have to be a good psychiatrist. Just very basic two things: the ability to empathize and facilitating language. And I guess those are the two most important. I mean, when you talk about language, language is a sub aspect of culture, and culture itself, it's this living thing, this big thing in the room, which influences the way we all see the world. And I mean, and when a person um, of any culture comes into the room with you, there are aspects of your humanity that is pretty much, will I say, basic, that is shared between both of you. And that's where you begin to operate from. I mean, at the level of that, that's how you're able to connect with this person, establish rapport. And of course, with your gift of empathy, if you have it, and you must to be a good psychiatrist, you begin to navigate this person's experiences and trying to get a sense of what the experiences are. And the truth about patients and service users is that they can tell when people permit the word bullshitting them. They know those who care about their conditions. They know who are just marking time and all. So for me, I mean, moving from Lagos, which is like the metropolitan city of or economic city of Nigeria, to London, it was a big culture shock. I mean, add onto that COVID-19, because I moved within 6 months of moving, there was a pandemic. So it's been a very interesting experience. And obviously, I mean, as a Black psychiatrist, um, I've had to look after Nigerians, Africans and diaspora, Iranians. Think about any culture at all. Um, any culture at all. I've had to look after them in the UK here. And the experience is really that, first and foremost, and it's something that is even obvious to anyone who reads or who just follows or is conversant with cultural studies. The Black experience in the diaspora is nothing to write home about in many ways, because think about it, the Blacks are still the ones who get, who are still, I mean, are still have to be navigated through the both the justice system as well as the psychiatric route as well. And this is something that's always, I mean, we cannot, and even in the conception of psychiatry itself, the justice system and psychiatry, there's always been a relationship between them. And think about it, the forensic psychiatrist sits right there in the middle of both. And so that's one thing that became very obvious to me, that the amount of Black people that are sectioned, of course, sectioning, for those who are just joining or those who do not know, is, I mean, it's really the act of lawfully detaining patients against their will. And that's something that we often have to do sometimes here. If you're able to establish that a patient has a mental illness, if you're able to establish that this patient is illness, put them at risk to themselves or to others, it becomes pertinent for you as a psychiatrist to, use those powers. And the truth about it is, there are statistics that prove that the amount of people who are most sectioned are people of Black origin, right here in the UK as well. So this cultural undertone is something that is very, very, very important. And then also another thing that, as I guess, the diasporan experience brings, especially to the Black experience, is there's a certain cultural dilution that has happened, which many times also doesn't really help much. So back in Nigeria, the influence of the family was quite heavy. I mean, the family carries the burden. I mean, and you can also interpret that to mean that the family carries the shame, the illness. There's that strong sense of the family being involved, their presence. They accompany the patients to the hospitals, they live with the patients, they look after the patients. Of course, there are good aspects of this because that means that there's some level of monitoring of mental states. There's some level of monitoring of how the patients fare, and there's also safeguarding of society. But then also there is, like, I expressed emotions, critical comments, over involvement, and there's how this also influences the natural history of the illness itself. So it's quite interesting to see how all this also plays out. I mean, in the UK. I mean, they're also even in the UK here, there are families who are probably let's say first generation migrants who have kept their culture, and they, I mean, and the culture of Nigeria, or the predominant culture in Nigeria, is really that mental illness is a shame that must be covered and protected very closely. And you have those experiences as well here, where patients who are very ill and need interventions are prevented by the family because they are trying to keep it within the family. So there are just very interesting ways in which the culture manifests. And I'm sure that your experience also in Yale, I mean, because I mean, you're a Black psychiatrist, you may have had to look after Black patients at some point in time, and also of other races. I would love to hear what your own thoughts are about that as well.
Yeah, I think I love everything that you were saying, especially this idea that culture really, in many ways, defines how we perceive and then how we interpret the things that we're perceiving and experiencing. And I think I found that treating different people from different backgrounds is really important to get an understanding of what their cultural formation is and how they are, interpreting and experiencing. I think one of the things that you talked about a little bit earlier that is pertinent here is that, like, when we look at who defines mental illness, it's really defined by sort of consensus, right? Like, we can all be, I mean, in truth, we're all having different experiences, right? No two people can experience the same thing, even in the same room, even right next to each other. What makes you technically mentally ill versus not is whether there's consensus around your experience. So if you're hearing a voice and nobody else in the room hears it, that's hallucination. If three of us can agree we hear the voice, then it's not, so it's really a socially cultural, informed construct of how and when we decide someone has a mental illness versus not. And then we have this framework for thinking about, like, how we categorize them. And even now, as we understand, like, the DSM, which is like the main manual that we use in the US for diagnosing illness, mental illness, we now are saying, like, this actually doesn't really make that much sense. You can have two people that have depression and have completely non-overlapping symptoms, but we categorize it as the same disease and might want to treat it the same way, right? So saying all of that to say that the more I've gotten into this field, the more and more I've come to appreciate that many of the things as like a medical student or an undergrad I might have thought of as very rigid, like biologically informed things are really more socially, culturally consensus-based ideas. And I think it becomes really pertinent when we think about the power that we have, as you said, to really detain people against their will and take away their personal freedoms. And so it's a great responsibility, and it's really, really critical, I think, for us to think about, again, who created psychiatry, what were their ideas about people when they were creating this, and then how does that inform the way that we now are putting labels on people, and as a result, deciding who gets to navigate in a certain way and who gets freedoms taken away. And so it's just been very interesting to kind of really get into the nuance. There's really much more gray than sometimes we're willing to sort of admit on the surface.
Yeah, Izzy, you're very spot on. I mean, in the way you put it, and I'm sorry. I'm not very good at keeping time, but I would probably need the organizers to let us know when it's about time for us to start to think about answering questions from the audience, because I imagine as people are talking and as we are talking, there may be a sense of people having thoughts. You can share your thoughts in the comment section as well. It will help us to also just know that we are not just talking to ourselves, because it's beginning to it's beginning to feel that way, AZA, that we are just
And it is a great conversation,
Yeah,
but
we're
yeah,
enjoying the
definitely.
I do want them
conversation.
to come in.
I totally agree. It is a great conversation, but I don't know if Ilori has something to say. Pardon me.
No, just
Um,
that we have about 5 more minutes for this section before we go into the Q&A, where people can voice out their specific questions or just put them in the comment section.
right. So
Thank you.
I just ask you a very specific question, AZA, now, and this is really about portfolio building. So what advice would you have for, people listening in who are trying to build a certain kind of portfolio to help their course to becoming psychiatrists? I don't know if you have any ideas. I probably may speak first. So yes, I've always knew I was going to be a psychiatrist since that experience, that experience whilst in school. So that when I did my housemanship, the only other field that I thought I was natural at as well was obstetrics and gynecology. In fact, when I did, because in Nigeria we have this thing called the youth service period. It's about a year after your first year as an houseman. You go and serve in some remote area if you like. And I did mine in a very remote area, and I was, just delivering twins up and down. And then when I told the nurses there that, oh, I am going to become a psychiatrist, they were so aghast. In fact, one of them just couldn't imagine that I was going to become a psychiatrist. But bottom line is, around that period as well, when I was going to do like my housemanship course, because you had to make a presentation, I did something on psychosis at the time. And I had relationships with psychiatrists as well. There's Niro Kewale, who, like myself, was a psychiatrist at the time already, and he was also a writer. So I befriended him, and I would go to the psychiatric hospital in Yaba to just see what it was like there. And I began to receive mentorship from quite a number of psychiatrists who were working in that system at the time. And my navigation into the UK here is not without the help of Professor Femi Oyebode, who has just released a powerful new book on rare rare cases in psychiatry recently. I'll get a copy of it before the end of the day and show everyone. So maybe you guys should copy as they say. But I'm saying that my experience has really been that of mentorship, very strategic mentorship and help from people who are already in the field as well. And I guess this opportunity also affords younger psychiatrists in helping. But I don't know, maybe you have something else that you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think mentorship is so critical. People who have walked the path and can not only strategize with you and let you know which ways to go, but also which traps to avoid. I would say that in the U.S. System, a lot of the sort of standard things, doing well in your coursework, getting good scores on the STEP exams are important, getting good letters of recommendation, which I think kind of in some ways can coincide with mentorship, right? People who know you, people who you've been able to develop a relationship with, who can really speak to your quality as a person, even more so than like what you can technically do or what you know and not know. Because in some ways, residency programs are making an investment in you. They're making an investment of resources and of faculty and all these things. And they want to, frankly, know what the return on that investment is going to be, right? And so part of how you kind of make that argument is through all those things we talked about, mentorship, interviews. But then I think also sometimes the biggest barrier is like having a compelling narrative. And that's something that, mentors can also help you with. It's something I'm happy to talk to people about if they're interested. But when you write your personal statement and when you go to your interviews, really what people they may say this explicitly, but really what they're looking for is a narrative. They want to know, like, where are you coming from? Where are you now? Where are you going? And how does being a psychiatrist play into that? How does being in this residency program help you to get from where you are to where you're trying to go?
Where you're going to go.
So the more that you can really make that narrative clear and make it clear why psychiatry fits, why this residency program fits into getting you to where you're going and painting a really clear picture of where you think you're trying to go. Now, everything doesn't have to be there. There were lots of times in my interviews where I was like, yeah, I'm not actually sure how those things are going to fit together, but I know that they can fit together. And actually, I'm hoping that this program can help me figure out, how these things fit together. So I would say that's the other thing I would say, just having a compelling narrative and understanding how to weave in that program, weave in psychiatry into that narrative so that the person you're talking to, the person reading your personal statement really gets a sense of like where your momentum is and wants to be a part of that. They want to contribute to your story.
Thank you, AZA, for that. That's very, very helpful. I see we're having a few questions tracking in. I don't know if AZA also is open to just looking at some of the questions yourself, and
Yeah.
maybe we can just answer them, the ones that are directed to each other, and then the ones that just come in and we're able to have conversations around them. So I see that
Yes.
there's a question. There's a question here for me about the biggest challenges I'm facing in the process of, or that I faced in the process of starting residency. I'm not in residency at the moment. I've just completed the MTI scheme, which is really, it feels a bit like some kind of training in itself. So I'm just working as a non-training grade psychiatrist. The plan really would be to decide if I could go through either route. I mean, so I have enough years of experience to go in through to build a portfolio and just get appointed as a psychiatrist. I could go through that route. The other alternative for me would be to go back into higher training because I already have about 7 years of experience in psychiatry. So it doesn't make sense for me to go back to core training, but that would mean that I have to complete the membership exams, which the equivalent I wrote about 5 years ago in Nigeria. So obviously, I mean, and this is of course the consequences of relocating. I was just reading about an Afghan minister who is a bicycle dispatcher these days in Germany, and this obviously is the experience of sometimes relocating. When you move from where you are, you may have to take a job of lower status to your regional status. But the best thing is to often see these things as just stepping back a bit, because the truth about it is, if I had come into the UK as a consultant and started working as a consultant, I probably would be back home now. because of the nuances of the experiences. So yes, the biggest challenge I would have to imagine is in getting into the residency program itself will be to first and foremost create a very good portfolio. And creating a portfolio would mean things like what we've spoken about earlier today, so I won't go into that a lot. And obviously, the first thing you need to do to get into the UK is first to be certified, to have a GMC registration, and without that you can't go too far. So Izzy, would you take the next question? I think it's something about encountering elderly patients and how easy it is to have genuine conversations with other people, or is there a bit of hesitancy because they may think you are trying to psych on them? I don't know what that means, but but I guess I'll leave it to you to do justice to that question.
Yeah. So do I encounter a lot of elderly patients? Yes. I think depending on what aspect of psychiatry you're in, you will see a different, you will see varying degrees of the population that you're working with. But over the past 2 years, I've seen a number of elderly patients, and that presents unique challenges because there are a lot of intersections between things like dementia, a lot of sort of other things that impact wellness as we age, and then how that also impacts mental health. So it is really a unique population to work with, and I find it meaningful. I actually find that it is easy to have genuine conversations with other people, even when they know that I'm a psychiatrist, because in truth, people want to connect. They want to be heard. They want to feel like someone cares and listens to them. And I think one of the gifts that you probably should have, to be a psychiatrist, but that you will also develop as a psychiatrist, is that ability to listen deeply. And it's a thing that many people just don't do in casual conversation. And so I think when people feel like you are listening to them deeply, they actually, at least in my experience, they actually open up more. They might share things with you that they might not share with other people, because the truth is, a lot of people are hoping for an outlet. They just don't want to go to the psychiatrist, right? They don't want to go to the office. They don't want to deal with the stigma of maybe saying yeah, I go to therapy. But they're really looking for an opportunity to offload some of these just internal things that they don't share. So even when people think, or know that I'm a psychiatrist, I find that they're still willing to have.
Thank you for that. Just to add also to the experience of elderly patients. Yes, I mean, in the UK as well, here we experience a lot of elderly patients. I mean, the life expectancy in the UK is somewhere in the 80s and the eighth decade of life. So what that essentially means is that people who have mental illnesses from childhood or even in their adolescence would often live, if they live long enough, into old age. There are people who are in old age would develop old age related mental illnesses like AZA, as mentioned earlier, dementias and so forth. And then there are people who would, in old age also develop unusual and delayed onset of psychosis. And then there are mental illnesses, medical illnesses that may mimic or may have manifestations of psychiatric connotations and so forth. And this also becomes very important for us to put in place. And old age psychiatry is quite rewarding. I mean, there's a blossoming field in psychiatry here as well. There's not a lot of people in it. And it's something that I've been thinking a lot about in truth, because the older adults are just a fantastic population of people to work with. They have so much experience, so much wealth of experience to share with you, and they're very nice people actually. So yeah, that's it. There's a question here about the differences between a psychiatrist and a clinical psychologist. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor. A psychologist is probably someone who has quite an advanced degree in psychology or in clinical psychology. At least that's the experience that I know. So what that means essentially is that the clinical psychologist often would use psychological treatments to help patients, and the psychiatrist would use oftentimes medical biological therapies to help patients. Well, the thing about it is that a part of your training as a psychiatrist, even in the UK as well, and back in Nigeria, and I imagine also in America, is that you are expected to have some level of competency in psychotherapies. So you're supposed to have at least have an understanding, a grounding in it, even in your theoretical, conceptual framework of thinking, because obviously the psychiatrist still follows the biopsychosocial model in their way of interacting with patients' mental illnesses and the way they intersect. So you're expected to have that understanding, and then you're also supposed to have some know-how in being able to deliver some of these psychotherapies, because I mean supportive psychotherapy starts from the moment the patient enters into the room with you, and you're expected to do a bit of that, to support this patient as much as possible, support the family, navigate even the ways you're going to interact with the patients, the way you question them, the way you interact with them. These are very important skills that psychotherapies enables you as a psychiatrist to do better. I don't know if AZA has anything to add to that.
No, I think that was perfect. The major limitation of a clinical psychologist is that they cannot prescribe medications, and a psychiatrist can prescribe medications. I think usually clinical psychologists, I would say, generally speaking, are probably going to be more adept at psychotherapy just because they focus much more on it. But I think a good psychiatrist should be able to be confident enough in psychotherapy that they can deliver that treatment in a way that's true and that is meaningful. But then we can also prescribe medications, while as a clinical psychologist can't. I also say there's a question here about, are there psychiatrists who just see elderly people? Yes, in the US they're called geri psychiatrists or neuropsychiatry, and they, that's all of the people that they see are elderly. So that is definitely something that you can do.
There's a question here also about do psychiatrists go into private therapies? Yes, it depends on what. Yes, the generic answer is yes. You can't go into private therapy. Yeah, that's pretty much it. But you have to be qualified really before you can go into that. And then there's also something about the intricacies in the patient-doctor relationship within the clinics. Well, I guess that question is a bit very broad. And what I would suggest is, if you're able to lay your hands on any good psychiatry text, especially SIMS, which is a very good psychiatric text, and even the opening chapters of any serious psychiatric textbook would help you understand better the relationship, the patient-doctor relationships in clinics. There's another question here about Thank you, doctors. This from Miriam Adetona. This has been so enlightening. I have two questions. I have a firm interest in psychiatry, and I know I will probably end up specializing in it. However, I'm also partial to public health, so I'm thinking of exploring preventative psychiatry if there's a field like that. In talking to a mentor, he suggested doing a master's in public health before residency. I want to know what you think. What would you advise? And also if there's a field such as preventative psychiatrist. Do you want to take this question, AZA?
Yeah.
Preventative psychiatry.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm not aware of a field specifically as preventative psychiatry, but I think are different ways in which people are practicing that concept. So a lot of people who are in the community psychiatrists, a lot of what they're trying to do is to prevent people from not only developing mental illnesses, but if they have a mental illness, prevent them from having to be hospitalized. I think getting further training in public health is something that can be very valuable. I have a few different colleagues who did do an MPH. Thinking about when to do it, I think, is also important. I think you can do it prior to residency. And if you do, then that becomes a part of your narrative, right? Like, I went to do public health first because X, Y, Z, whatever the reasons you think are best to do it before. And that can easily be something that you bring with you into your residency. For instance, for me, I did a PhD before starting residency in neuroscience. So that was a part of my narrative. I went and get specific training in this thing that I think is going to actually help me be a better psychiatrist and inform the way that I think about, what the brain is doing when we are looking at a patient who's suffering in psychiatry. So I think when to do it is something like you kind of have to decide just based on your own narrative. But I think doing it before residency is something that is commonly done, and I think it can give you a lens that is you and that can allow you to sort of operate within the space of preventative psychiatry. The other thing I will say is that just because a field doesn't necessarily exist in that sense, doesn't mean that there aren't people who are doing that. And sometimes it's just about kind of getting a community together around it. And so I'm sure there are people who practice this in a way like and consider that what they're doing is preventative psychiatry. But as far as I know, there are no like fellowships, for instance, in preventative psychiatry as there is for like interventional or child or geriatrics. So it doesn't exist as a field in that sense, but I think there are definitely people who are practicing that and there are ways to practice it.
Yeah, thanks for that, AZA. I was just going to say that there is a global mental health MSc, which is being sponsored. I think there are some scholarships for it in King's College in London. And I guess that's something that you can think about because it brings this interest in public health alongside psychiatry. And what is preventative psychiatry? It pretty much oftentimes will be a context of public health, isn't it? Because in public health it's believed that, well, rather than wait for people to have these diseases, why can't we nip it in the bud? But obviously for psychiatry, that will be in the purview of precision psychiatry, where you're looking at genetics and trying to see if there are things in the genes that can help you prognosticate that this person would have an illness. There are already some genetic disorders that we already know that, if the patient has these genetic disorders, it can predispose them to mental illnesses. So there's that, and then there's also the fact that are we able to control the psychosocial milieu, so to speak, to help the patients. If lives was better for a lot of people in urban cities and settlements and in society, they probably won't come down with mental illness in the first instance. Look at COVID-19 has happened now, and we're going to have to battle the consequences of that maybe for another 10, 20, 100 years, because there's grief, which has now been devastated in its disruptions. There is also all these other issues, but not to take too much of our time. These are ways to think about what preventative psychiatry will look like for you. But I guess a good place to start would be to first and foremost research into this global mental health MSc in King's College and see if it's something that interests you, because it sits really in a place between your interest at this time. The other question is specifically towards me. Is something along the lines of seeing me talking outside literature. I'm a doctor, sometimes I even forget myself, but Yeah, I do actually do other things outside writing and literature. You're asking specifically if I think going through the NYSC program before writing licensing exams. Well, I guess it's a personal choice really for you to take. For you to take. If you, I was very much enriched by my NYC experience. You know, I went to the East. I went to live in a village among some people and had a year with them and enjoyed myself there. I practiced medicine and met with people. I met with the Igbo culture in ways that I never would have met with it. So it's really about your own personal choice. But what I guess is important for you to do will be to use that opportunity because the NYC affords you a time to really read. I mean, it's like a gap year if you see it that way. So you can use that period to focus on passing your exams. Obviously, you have to use the houseman years and the money from that to write the exams because these exams are not particularly cheap to come by. But I guess it's an opportunity really. That 1 year period is one that you can use to bash out the exams and get them over with. Yes, I think I've answered that question at best of my ability. Um, there are other questions here, but I don't know, Ilary, can we go through these questions?
I'm so sorry. I think we're out of time. We're out of time. We're trying to end by 3 p.m.
Right.
Yes. But I don't know if you
Right.
can very briefly just
But
speak about what you think the future of psychiatry is. Psychiatry is a field that's constantly evolving. And and it's also influenced by different social and cultural issues, like someone has said in the comment section. When you go back to the things that were once labeled mental illnesses that are more socially acceptable now. And what's the future of psychiatry in your opinion? And also I'm very interested in understanding the intersections between spirituality, between alternative therapies, when it ties into mental health. What would the practice of psychiatry open up itself to, in understanding the human mind, in understanding behaviors and all of those things? What does that picture look like? I know my question is quite broad and vague, but I think it's personal. Just what you personally think, about the practice of psychiatry. Yeah. And then we round up. Sorry, everyone, that we can't take all the questions. We're really out of time.
Izzy, do you want to go for it?
Yeah.
Because this question.
I mean, I think the future of psychiatry looks like us, right? The conversations that we're having, right? As the field becomes more diverse, as we bring our full selves, our full ingenuity, our full creativity, the full power of our ancestors into the field, it will be transformed into a much more holistic, field that really asks the question, like, how do we create a society that encourages people to live in reality and to achieve wellness? We don't have a society like that currently. And as Dami mentioned, like, a lot of the reasons we're seeing people in the hospital has much more to do with the psychosocial environment that they find themselves in and that they've been conditioned through and developed through versus some specific genetic thing that's happening in the brain. I think neuroscience and genetics and all these different advances will also help us to better inform what is happening and come up with better treatments. But I think ultimately the field will have to really evolve into a much more holistic view of the human that takes into consideration the spiritual reality of our experience, and how that is then shaped by the culture and the social influences. And so these conversations that we're having are conversations that are happening in psychiatry broadly now. And so I think it is really, really exciting because it really is outlining where we're going to go.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, there's not so much to add to what AZA has said. Psychiatry is what you're looking at. I mean, so the beauty of psychiatry is that it's a multidisciplinary field in itself. It's always this and that, not this or that. It's always this and that. So we're going to get to a place where, people would begin to develop new therapies, new ways of looking at psychiatry, new aspects of psychiatry will be unearthed, new frontiers will be open. And what is most important is that there's a multiplicity of opportunities and alternatives for our patients to get well from. I mean, we're getting to a point where patients do not have to take medications if they do not want to. And there are other therapies that are available to them.
Yeah.
Places where we can, there are activities they can take part in that can help to heal them. And the whole idea of it is that if we're able to make sure that healing is at the basis of everything we're doing, the society will be.
Wow. Thank you so much, sirs. This has been a fantastic conversation. I would not say much. I'll hand over to Chinaza, the president of PENG. Is she still with us? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi,
all right,
everyone. So thank you so much, Doctors Dami and Doctors AZA. Do you know, I'm just remembering that you actually told me it's AZA, but I forgot the pronunciation before you mentioned it again today. This conversation has been fantastic so far. Hi, Daisy. Hi, Daisy. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for everyone who has joined the call. I'm seeing students from Uni-Ilorin, Kano, Lagos, like from different places. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation and being here. I've learned so much from this conversation. Like I think my book is full. I even have book references from Dr. Dami, Franz Fanon, the book by Dr. Prof. Oyebode, then the very, very key comments that Dr. AZA made about listening deeply and how the future of psychiatry is this kind of conversations that we're having now. So I'm truly grateful for everyone for participating. Thank you so much, Drs. AZA and Dr. Dami. We hope, because when you mentioned mentorship, I think Dr. Dami or Dr. AZA, one of them really spoke about how they were passionate about mentorship. We hope that we can, have you as one of our main mentors in our organization. I'm waiting for a response.
Definitely.
Definitely.
I'm very open to that. Illyria has my email address, and Illyria and I, I guess to an extent, I'm probably one of the reasons why he's doing this kind of things already, because Illyria knew me as a
confused medical student,
Yes, I mean, back then. So yes, so he has my email address, and please, if anyone has any questions, you can shoot an email to me. I may not respond immediately, but I would respond definitely.
Okay, thank you so much, sirs. I would like to thank my co-founders, Ileri Lawal. Thank you for being such a fantastic anchor. Please, let's clap for Ileri virtually or physically. Fei-Kemi Fashino, I don't know if she's here. Hi, Fei, show your face. Let them see you now. So this is Fei. Then Shehu Idowu. We're all doctors. We all finished from Unilag, and we're all interested in psychiatry. So in absence of any other comment or question, I would like us to end the program here. I hope we had a fun time.
Yes.
You guys can unmute your mic and say yes or no. Don't worry. Like that dog.
Yes. Great conversation. Happy to connect with Dami too.
All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much. We hope to do this again soon.
Thank you guys. Thank you very much.
All right,
thank you.
Thank you.
Izzy, thank you very much for I'd probably keep in touch. I mean,
we'll contact you.
Yeah, definitely will. All right. Thank you all. Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.